I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Caffeinated and ready to review Mastodon's Once More Around the Sun. Caffeinated. You caffeinated?
No.
You don't drink caffeine,
No.
do you? That's kind of sucky.
I know you're caffeinated.
Yeah.
I can always count on that. But
Yeah. 4 cups of coffee a day. I better be caffeinated.
I'm sober.
Good, you better be sober. I'm also not that. So, Once More Around the Sun. That is the 6th album from Atlanta, Georgia-based metal band. And let's get into subgenres. You guys know how much Tom and I love subgenres because they matter so much. This is prog metal / sludge metal. It's
really?
Effing metal. Just call it metal. They're rocking your face off. They're melting it up with guitar riffs and grinds and rah, rah, rah. They're doing all sorts of things to your face with rock music, and that's awesome. It's metal. Mastodon, Once More Around the Sun. They came out with The Hunter in 2011, and we absolutely love that album. In 2009, Crack the Sky. This is now, I didn't like that, but you loved it.
Yeah.
And that was before,
I like it even more than I did back then. It's an album I keep coming back to.
I certainly do. But I think that, for me, at that time, I wasn't really into metal music. You had not converted me yet.
I still had some work to do.
You have worked your magic Tom Hummer sauce on me, and now I love...
Don't ever say that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And
Hummer sauce should never be a term.
Mastodon. I also have always loved Mastodon because when I was a kid, the Black Power Ranger was my favorite Power Ranger.
Oh, no.
His Zord was the Mastodon.
I don't even know what the hell a Zord is. That's a thing?
You don't know what Megazord is? What's
thing?
wrong with you? You're a child of the 90s. Power Rangers is our thing.
I didn't even think Power Rangers was cool in the 90s.
Okay, let's just talk about the music.
Okay, let's get back to it.
We have no way to relate to each other, obviously, since you didn't watch Power Rangers.
We should stop being friends, bro.
So, Once More Around the Sun. After The Hunter was a fairly progressive album. It also saw Mastodon using a lot more just sung vocals, where they're really just belting out powerful vocal melodies, and not so much like the guttural, this is screams, no screams, and so on Once More Around the Sun, you see a continuation of that, and the band has said, this is a continuation of their songwriting process from The Hunter, but I would say this is a very different album from The Hunter, especially once you get into the meat of the album in the middle and into the later tracks. Now, you start off this record with Tread Lightly and The Motherlode, and both of those tracks are very quick, upbeat. They're about 5 minutes each, and they follow a relatively simple rock formula. It's actually a pop structure famous by popular music of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, which is fine as long as you execute it well, which I think that they do in those songs. These songs have these just huge monumental choruses. The vocals are just belting out at the top of the guy's lungs, and lots of vocal layers there too. Lots of just moving guitars, grinding guitars, heavy bass lines, bombastic drums, and a great instrumentation in the bridge. So just kicks off the album right now. From there, Tom, where did you go with this album after that? Because the reason why I wanted to highlight those 2 tracks first, we picked both of them.
We did pick both of those. They're really great tracks. They kick off the album really well, and in particular, you're absolutely right to kind of pinpoint those as being the big powerhouse chorus tracks. But what I also think is interesting about Tread Lightly in particular is you don't even get to the first chorus until like 2 or 3 minutes into the song. Right. They do kind of a drop chorus thing, still kind of within that pop structure. It's a pretty common thing to do, but still just to kind of wait that long to at least get to that big release in the chorus, that kind of makes sense. But then you move on to the title track, track 4, Once More Around the Sun, right after the High Road, track 3, which was kind of the big single from the album, which makes sense. It's got one of the more hooky choruses.
It sure does.
Once More Around the Sun is the shortest track on the album, and at that point, it's interesting because I actually think that's probably one of the weaker tracks, even as the title track.
And I think that that's kind of because it's shorter, but it's also the 4th song in a row that follows that verse chorus structure. And whenever you have the same song structure or formula for a song used in succession, it always gets weaker with each track because it dilutes its power.
It does, and I think the best part of that track is the bridge. You got a great guitar riff in there,
I totally agree.
But that's because it's the part of the song that mixes it up, and it sounds the most different from what comes before it. But really, as you continue to listen to this album, the one big thing that I notice right away, and I noticed it every time I listened to it. I still like the album, but the big limiting factor to me is just lack of dynamics. I listened back to The Hunter, and The Hunter is actually an album I've come back to regularly since we reviewed it a few years back. And The Hunter had tracks like the title track, The Hunter, Creature Lives, and The Sparrow as the closing track, which brought it down a little bit. It provided some very much needed dynamics that I feel like Once More Around the Sun just doesn't have.
Yeah, it doesn't have that break in intensity in the album. No, and every one of these tracks is just the entire time, and it gets a little monotonous after a while.
It does, and I think that any of these tracks are good on their own, and that's why this album continued to grow on me. I liked it more every time I listened to it, but what I noticed, and one thing you got to understand is Jake and I, when we're listening to these albums, we listen to them in a lot of different contexts. We listen to them at work, we listen to them in the car, we listen to them at home, like on our systems at home, and sometimes we're able to listen to them all the way through. Sometimes our listening experience is a little broken up. Like if we're at work, we have something come up,
meetings,
meetings.
So many meetings.
Too many meetings.
Tired of meetings.
Meetings. Anyway, so as I would go through this, I found that I actually liked the album a little bit more when my listen was broken up into segments. If I was listening to it 3 or 4 tracks at a time and then come back to it, it felt more fresh. Whereas if I listened to it all the way through, by the time I got to the end, even though I was still liking each track, I was kind of like, okay, I feel like I've heard this a little bit before. Now, I still think Mastodons are just absolutely brilliant at what they do. They make great metal music. This is a little bit poppier of an album. It's a little bit more structured, a little less dynamic, that's true, but I still think it's a very good effort.
And not to mention, like, we got to talk about their biggest strengths, what they've shown on every album, which is instrumentation and musical ability. The things that these guys do is awesome, and they just execute at such a high level that when it comes to metal music, it's almost like quintessential, right?
Yeah.
And they totally hit it right where they need to hit it. The other thing is that the vocals are actually pretty good throughout. There's one of the tracks, I forget which track it is, I made a note but I don't want to read it, but the vocalist actually shrieks on one of the tracks, and it sounds freaking badass. Like it just hits the spot, and I think that just having that just kind of just forethought of knowing how to craft the vocals to make the sound that they were going for on this album. I think that's a strength that a lot of other metal bands should really aspire to hold themselves. And Mastodon they just get it. I feel like. Now it's important to note that while we were commenting on that pop structure that Mastodon is using, especially on our favorite tracks, the tracks that neither of us picked, Tom, in the middle of the album, 5, 6, and 7, don't adhere to those tracks. They're the more progressive tracks. A little bit sludgier, a little bit faster at times too, but they're going all over the place. They're not adhering to that structure, and at the same time, like we don't like him as much because, quite frankly, I think that the vocals do less on those tracks. Because the vocals are set up for are obviously more prominent in the more poppier structured tracks.
And also, what's a progressive song structure without a low point in dynamics?
Totally agree. That's a great point.
It just isn't nearly as effective. You're going all over the place structurally, you're incorporating a lot of cool things, but if there's not dynamic contrast, you're not going to pick up on those differences as much. They're just not as exaggerated. Another thing I think is worth mentioning is that I'm willing to bet that this album is very polarizing to Mastodon fans. I bet it pisses a lot of people off because I know that metal fans take it very personally when bands like Mastodon move from the more prog kind of dark sphere into something a little more driving, a little more direct, and a little more pop-oriented. I can understand that if that's just what you like, but at the same time, I don't think it's fair to come into this with an expectation and base it on what you want the band to be. You still have those previous Mastodon records to go back and listen to. They're still freaking awesome. This is just a different iteration of the band, and maybe some of those virtues aren't quite as good as what they've done in the past, but I still think there's a lot of great things to say about this record, and as an album on its own, I think it's very good.
Yeah, and it's cool too because it comes out into a few tracks that really kind of show some other influences that the band's into, and kind of as you were talking about, give a different side to Mastodon that we haven't seen before. Track 8, Aunt Lisa, is definitely I got Mars Volta. Like these guys have clearly been listening to like At the Drive-In and Mars Volta, just with how just guitar bombastic and dirty it sounded. Ember City was probably the poppiest track on the record. Both of us loved that track. They executed it at a very high level, and the vocal hooks in that chorus are just fantastic. And it sounds like, honestly, a lot like Coheed.
I can see that.
And then Halloween, which I really like that track 10, very much sounded like Queens of the Stone Age. So you can definitely tell that this band is listening to other influences that maybe are less metal or hardcore as Mastodon. And as Mastodon fans, we just need to allow the band to kind of traverse new territory, change their sound, and evolve, because that's what music is all about. Where are you at on this one, Tio?
I'm giving it 84.
Okay,
I really liked it.
A little less than you, just because I would have liked more variety and a better straight-through album listen. Obviously, that's something that really affects me. Going 80 on this one. That's an 82 from Velocities in Music. Where did you guys come out on this as a Mastodon fan? Are you loving Once More Around the Sun? Or are you, kind of pissed off, as Tom kind of alluded to some Mastodon fans being earlier? We'd love to hear from you and your feedback at www.velocitiesmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesmusic. And as always, we want you to follow us on Twitter. We'd like you to like us on Facebook. And we'd also like it if you told Tom or myself some records that you'd like to see us review on this channel. New, old, who cares? I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.